The sound engineer's hand was shaking as he reached for the reverb dial. One wrong move in that New York recording studio would either ruin Whitney Houston's most important session or create the most iconic vocal performance in music history. What happened next broke every rule of recording. It was 2:47 a.m. on October 15th, 1992, at Hit Factory Studios in Manhattan. Whitney had been in that claustrophobic recording booth for over 4 hours, trying to breathe life into a song that everyone said was wrong for her. I Will Always Love You was Dolly Parton's country ballad, sweet and simple. But Whitney's powerhouse voice seemed to overpower every arrangement they tried. Everyone in that studio heard a mistake that night, everyone except Whitney Houston. What she heard in that wrong sound would become the voice that defined a generation. If you're discovering the incredible untold stories behind music's greatest legends for the first time, hit that subscribe button now. We're about to reveal how one technical error created the biggest ballad of all time. Producer James Sullivan was exhausted. They'd burned through 6 different arrangements and nothing was working. The label executives at Arista Records had been clear. They needed a massive hit for the Bodyguard soundtrack. Kevin Costner had personally requested this song for the movie, but after hours of failed attempts, it felt impossible. Maybe we should call it a night, Sullivan suggested, rubbing his tired eyes. We can try again tomorrow. But Whitney shook her head firmly. No, there's something here. I can feel it. We just haven't found it yet. Marcus Thompson, the 28-year-old sound engineer, had been watching Whitney work all night. He'd seen perfectionist artists before, but Whitney was different. She heard things that others couldn't. Every note had to be exactly right, not just technically perfect, but emotionally true. Marcus had grown up in the Bronx, the son of a jazz trumpeter who never quite made it big. He'd learned to hear music the way his father did, not just as melody and rhythm, but as conversation between instruments, as emotional dialogue that could communicate things words never could. That sensitivity had made him one of the most sought-after engineers in New York, despite his young age. Hit Factory Studios was legendary for a reason. The acoustics in Studio A had been designed by some of the greatest sound engineers in the world. The walls were constructed with specially treated wood that absorbed sound in precise frequencies, creating an environment where every vocal nuance could be captured with stunning clarity. The mixing board itself was a custom-built marvel, with more than 200 individual controls that allowed engineers to sculpt sound with surgical precision. But all of that technical perfection meant nothing if the engineer didn't understand the artist's vision. Marcus had worked with Whitney on 3 previous albums, and he'd learned that her genius lay not just in her vocal range, but in her ability to find the emotional center of any song. She could take the most technically complex arrangement and make it sound effortless, or transform the simplest melody into something that could break your heart. Tonight was different, though. Marcus could see the frustration building in Whitney's eyes with each failed take. The song wasn't cooperating, and everyone in the studio could feel the tension mounting. As Whitney prepared for another take, Marcus reached across the mixing board to adjust the vocal settings. His hand was trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. Instead of the subtle reverb setting he intended, his fingers accidentally pushed the dial to maximum. The booth suddenly filled with an enormous, cathedral-like echo. "That's wrong," Sullivan immediately called out from the control room. "Marcus, fix the reverb. It's way too much." Marcus quickly moved to correct his mistake, but something made him freeze. Whitney had stopped singing, but she hadn't moved from the microphone. She was standing completely still, eyes closed, as if she was listening to something nobody else could hear. "Wait," Whitney's voice came softly through the intercom. "Play that back." "Whitney, it was just a technical error," Sullivan explained. "The reverb was set wrong. Let's fix it and try again." But Whitney's eyes were now wide open, and there was something electric in her expression. "No, play it back exactly as it was. I want to hear what it sounded like with that reverb." Marcus hesitated, looking at Sullivan for guidance. This went against everything they'd been taught about proper recording technique. But something in Whitney's voice made him press play. The playback filled the studio with Whitney's voice, but transformed by that massive reverb into something otherworldly. The echo didn't diminish her power. It amplified it, creating layers of sound that seemed to stretch into infinity. It was as if her voice was coming from somewhere beyond the physical studio, from some emotional space that couldn't be contained by normal recording boundaries. Whitney closed her eyes again and listened to every second. When it finished, she opened them with the kind of smile that lighting technicians spend years trying to capture. "That's it," she breathed. "That's the sound I've been searching for." But to understand why that moment mattered so much, why Whitney heard magic where everyone else heard only a mistake, we need to go back to understand how she'd spent her entire life being told she was wrong. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born into music royalty, but even royalty comes with its own kind of pressure. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a legendary background singer who had worked with Elvis Presley and Aretha Franklin. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick. Music wasn't just in Whitney's blood, it was her birthright and her burden. From childhood, Whitney had been caught between worlds. Too R&B for pop radio, too pop for R&B purists. Too sophisticated for some audiences, not urban enough for others. The music industry seemed determined to tell her what she wasn't rather than celebrating what she was. Growing up in Newark, New Jersey, Whitney's voice was first heard in the New Hope Baptist Church. At age 11, she was already singing solos that left congregation members in tears. But even then, some church elders worried that her voice was too big for traditional gospel, too powerful, too dramatic, too everything. The church was Whitney's first classroom in the art of emotional truth. Every Sunday, she watched her mother, Cissy, command the choir with a presence that could silence a room or lift an entire congregation to their feet. Cissy didn't just sing, she channeled something deeper, something that connected directly to the souls of everyone listening. "Voice is just the instrument," Cissy would tell young Whitney during their practice sessions in the church basement. "But the message comes from somewhere else entirely. You have to learn to get out of your own way and let that message through." Those early lessons shaped everything about how Whitney approached music. She learned that technique without emotion was meaningless, but emotion without control was chaos. The balance between power and restraint became her signature, though it would take years for the music industry to understand what she was doing. At age 15, Whitney was already performing with her mother as a background singer in New York clubs. The experience was both thrilling and terrifying. Here was this teenager from Newark sharing stages with seasoned professionals, holding her own against singers who had been performing since before she was born. But the club circuit also exposed Whitney to the harsh realities of the music business. She saw talented artists destroyed by drugs, by exploitative contracts, by the constant pressure to be something other than what they naturally were. She watched singers lose their voices trying to chase trends, and others lose their souls trying to please record executives who didn't understand their art. When Whitney began pursuing a professional career in the early 1980s, the rejections were constant. Record executives would praise her vocal ability, but then explain why it wouldn't work commercially. "Your voice is incredible, but it doesn't fit our format. You're talented, but we're not sure how to market you. Maybe try changing your style." Every no felt like being told that the very essence of who she was wasn't quite right for the world she wanted to enter. Her breakthrough came when Clive Davis signed her to Arista Records in 1983. Davis saw what others had missed, that Whitney's voice wasn't too big, it was exactly as big as it needed to be. Her debut album became one of the best-selling debut albums by any artist in music history, but even success came with its own complications. Critics accused her of being manufactured, of abandoning her roots for mainstream appeal. Some in the R&B community felt she'd been packaged for white audiences. No matter what she achieved, there was always someone ready to tell her it was somehow wrong. By 1992, Whitney had already conquered the music world, but the Bodyguard soundtrack represented something different. This wasn't just about making another hit. It was about proving that her voice could carry an entire movie, that she could transition from music superstar to multimedia icon. The song choice was controversial from the beginning. "I Will Always Love You" was written and originally recorded by Dolly Parton in 1973. It was a country song, simple and heartfelt, the kind of intimate ballad that seemed designed for a more delicate voice than Whitney's. When Kevin Costner suggested the song for the movie, industry insiders were skeptical. How could Whitney, with her 4-octave range and gospel-trained power, possibly interpret Dolly Parton's gentle country ballad without overwhelming it completely? The early recording sessions seemed to confirm those doubts. Every arrangement they tried felt forced. When Whitney sang it straight, the song felt too small for her voice. When she added her signature vocal runs and power notes, the song lost its intimate charm. "We're trying to fit a symphony orchestra into a folk song," Sullivan had complained during one particularly frustrating session. "It's just not working." But Whitney refused to give up. She knew there was something powerful hidden in this song, some emotional truth that her voice could unlock if they could just find the right approach. That's what led them to that late October night, hour after hour of failed attempts, until Marcus Thompson's shaking hand accidentally created the sound that would change everything. After hearing the accidental reverb effect, Whitney didn't want to record another verse or try a different arrangement. She wanted to start completely over, building the entire song around that cathedral-like echo. "It's not just reverb," Whitney explained to the confused studio team. "It's space. It's the sound of longing, of love that's so big it can't be contained. That echo, it's not a mistake. It's the song's soul." Sullivan was still skeptical. "Whitney, it's completely unconventional. No ballad has ever used reverb like this. Radio programmers are going to think we've lost our minds." "Then let them think that," Whitney replied with the conviction that had carried her through every rejection, every criticism, every person who told her she was somehow wrong. "I'd rather be wrong in a way that's true than right in a way that's empty." What happened next was 3 hours of the most extraordinary recording in pop music history. Whitney didn't just sing the song, she inhabited it, letting her voice fill every corner of that massive sonic space the accidental reverb had created. The opening was barely a whisper, so intimate it felt like a confession. Then, as the emotion built, her voice began to expand, using that cathedral echo to create layers of longing and power that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of the studio itself. By the time she reached the final chorus, Whitney was singing with such passion that everyone in the studio stopped what they were doing just to listen. The reverb transformed her voice into something that sounded both utterly human and somehow divine. When the final note faded, the studio was completely silent. Sullivan, who had been skeptical just hours earlier, had tears in his eyes. Marcus Thompson, the engineer whose mistake had started it all, looked stunned by what they'd captured. "That," Sullivan said quietly, "is going to change everything." "I Will Always Love You" was released in November 1992. It entered the Billboard Hot 100 at number 48 and began climbing immediately. By December, it had reached number 1, where it would remain for an unprecedented 14 consecutive weeks. The song became more than just a hit. It became a cultural phenomenon. The reverb-drenched vocal arrangement that had started as a technical error became the new standard for power ballads. Whitney's interpretation transformed Dolly Parton's simple country song into an anthem of universal love and loss. The Bodyguard soundtrack became one of the best-selling soundtracks in music history, spending 20 weeks at number 1 on the album charts. Whitney's version of the song earned her Grammy nominations and confirmed her transition from music star to global icon. But beyond commercial success, that accidental reverb effect represented something far more important. It was proof that innovation often comes from embracing what others call mistakes, from having the courage to hear music in places where others hear only error. Dolly Parton herself praised Whitney's version, saying it had taken her simple song and transformed it into something she never could have imagined. The emotional power that Whitney found in that wrong reverb setting had unlocked feelings in the song that even its original writer hadn't fully realized were there. The recording has been analyzed by sound engineers and music producers for decades. That massive reverb setting, which had seemed so wrong in the moment, became a masterclass in how technical errors can become artistic breakthroughs when filtered through genuine vision and emotional truth. Today, "I Will Always Love You" remains one of the most beloved songs in popular music history. It has been streamed billions of times, covered by thousands of artists, and chosen as the soundtrack for countless weddings, memorials, and moments of profound emotion. Hit Factory Studios, where that magical night took place, has been preserved as a recording landmark. Musicians still come there hoping to capture some of the magic that Whitney and her team discovered in 1992. Marcus Thompson, the engineer whose shaking hand created the mistake that became a masterpiece, went on to become one of the music industry's most sought-after sound engineers. He often tells the story of that night, emphasizing how Whitney's ability to hear possibility in what others perceived as error taught him everything he needed to know about true artistry. Whitney Houston passed away in 2012, but her voice continues to inspire new generations of singers and music lovers. "I Will Always Love You" stands as perhaps her greatest single performance, a testament to the power of trusting your artistic instincts even when everyone else says you're wrong. The next time someone tells you that your creative vision is mistaken, that it doesn't fit the conventional mold, remember this story. Remember that Marcus Thompson's hand was shaking when he accidentally created the reverb setting that seemed so wrong to everyone in that studio. Remember that Whitney Houston heard something beautiful in that mistake because she had spent her entire life learning to find truth in the places where others saw only error. Sometimes the wrong sound is exactly the right sound. Sometimes what seems like a technical failure is actually the key to unlocking something transcendent. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to listen with your heart instead of your expectations, you can hear the voice of a generation emerging from what everyone else calls a simple mistake. That's the real power of believing in your artistic vision, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong, especially when the world tells you you're wrong.